Hey everyone, and welcome back. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So the big news over the last week, of course, is that all Social Security beneficiaries are going to be receiving a 3.2% increase next year in 2024, thanks in part to the cost of living adjustments. So whether you're a retiree on SSI or SSDI benefits, you are going to be receiving that 3.2% increase. However, this really got me to thinking that the government is essentially saying here that inflation, what prices have risen by since July, August, and September of last year when compared to the same months this year, has only risen by 3.2%. Now, I don't know about you, but over the past year, it sure seems like I've been spending more than 3.2% on the exact same goods and services. I've just on the grocery store alone, probably last year, I think I might have been spending maybe 60, perhaps even 70 at the store that I purchased the same goods and services. And when you compare that to this year, I'm spending $90 to $100. That's pretty much like a 40 to 50% increase, much higher than the 3.2% that the government is claiming. Now, of course, they are using other figures, other statistics than just food prices when calculating the CPIW, but we're going to be looking at some numbers today which clearly show that this formula is rigged and that inflation is actually much higher than 3.2%. And if it is much higher than 3.2% and we're only giving cost of living adjustments to seniors and other people receiving Social Security benefits an increase of 3.2%, well, their money is pretty much going to be deteriorating year over year, and our dollar is less and less value. But before we go ahead and dive into the main content of today's video, if you wouldn't mind helping me out real quickly by just giving this video a like, that just helps out with the good old YouTube algorithm, and also consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already. Okay, so as I just mentioned a moment ago, of course, they are saying inflation has only risen by 3.2%. Let me know in the comment section below if your expenses have only risen by 3.2% from last year to this year. I'm sure for many of you guys like me, you've seen your expenses have risen by a lot more than just 3.2%. For many of you, I'm guessing 10% or even more than that. And we actually had a very popular video being pushed around on X, formerly known as Twitter. And I watched that this morning and it really just blew my mind. He's basically going around Costco, and luckily for him, he actually took photos of the price tags of the things that he was buying 1 year ago, and now he has video evidence, and my mind was absolutely blown by how much prices have risen by. So let's go ahead and watch.
So I'm walking around Costco here and I'm noticing these prices. For example, these madras lentils, $15.99. I bought those a year ago for $6.99. I keep getting told that we got 6-7% inflation. You gotta be kidding me. Let's look at what else we got going on here. We literally bought this chicken broth, $5.69, 2 months ago. Dang, this is the flour we were buying for $5.99 last year.
The government has its own math that they manipulate in a dodgy way.
So again, that's pretty much absolutely mind-blowing evidence there. The prices have absolutely increased a lot more than 3.2%. Now, obviously, like I mentioned just a moment ago, they are not only looking at these items when figuring the CPIW, but it's clear, at least to my mind, that the government is absolutely rigging the statistics to make it seem like inflation is actually not rising at as fast of a pace as it actually has. And believe it or not, they've actually changed the formula since the 1980s to make inflation in the numbers that are coming in not seem as bad. So if we look at the highest COLAs that we've ever had, of course, back in 1979, the COLA was 9.9%. Then the following year, in 1980, it rose all the way up to 14.3%. That was the highest of all time. And then in 1981, it came in at 11.2%. Now, of course, last year it was 8.7%. But if they did not change the formula since the 80s and then again in the 90s, at 8.7% COLA last year for this year actually would have been a lot higher, probably close to 20% and the highest of all time. So there's actually a website called shadowstats.com, and it goes over the details of how they've changed the inflation metrics over time, how they measure inflation to make it not seem as bad, to make it seem like they're not killing our dollar as much as they have been by just printing recklessly over the past, couple of decades. So we can see here, this is the 1980s compared to today. The blue line here is how they measured inflation back in the 1980s, and the red line is how they measure inflation today. So you can see there, the blue line has constantly always been above the red line. And, last year, where it hit its peak, you can see the blue line is well over 15% there. So even though we only had inflation, measured at 8.7% last year, and that's why, all Social Security beneficiaries received a cost of living adjustment of 8.7%, it was actually a lot higher than that if we had used the 1980s metric. Now, they actually had another change in 1990, which also made it not seem as bad. So if we use the 1990s metric, again, the 1990s metric is the blue line there. Even last year, it was well over 10%, close to 15%. Yet, people on Social Security benefits were only receiving a cost of living adjustment of 8.7%. That's because they changed the metric, how they weigh inflation, to make it not seem as bad as it actually is. So we have to see their hidden agenda there. It's absolutely disgusting and not something that we want to see, obviously. And one of the downfalls of this, of course, is it's going to cause a lot of people on Social Security benefits to just continue to work because they need this money. The amount of benefits that they're receiving is not enough to pay for rent, medical expenses, food, and any other bills that may come up. It's just not enough to get by. So because of this, of course, we're having a lot of retirees being forced to go back to work either on a part-time and sometime on a full-time basis. Now, for some folks, it might be a deal where they just, they retire, they think it's a dream, they're sitting around for a few weeks, and then they realize, well, I may want to return back to work just to have something to do during the day, and maybe for the social aspects of it as well. And for them, great. But then there's also some folks who, unfortunately, are looking at what they're receiving in Social Security benefits and what they have in savings, and their savings are dwindling away, and they're like, oh, well, I probably do have to return to work because what I'm receiving is just not going to be enough to get by, or at least get by comfortably. So according to Yahoo Finance, more retirees are going back to work because they want to or need to. So they say that the two main reasons for coming back into the workforce are a tale of opposites. While 45% chose to work for social and emotional benefits like Eisenberg, a slightly larger percentage, 48%, felt they needed to work for financial reasons. So 48% of people returning to work is absolutely for financial reasons. Older adults, those aged 65 and older, represent the fastest growing group of homeless, while poverty among older Americans has escalated. Policymakers and researchers have been fretting that the share of older Americans with debt has risen from 38% to 63% since 1990, according to a recent report by the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. So obviously we have some very alarming numbers there. First off, we have homeless rates among the elderly going up, just absolutely skyrocketing. And then of course we have the amount of debt for older Americans also going from 38% in the 90s up to 63% today. So those two figures alone just do not really bode too well for what we want to see. They go on to say that for other retirees, the lack of retirement planning or savings is coming back to haunt them. They say, quote, "It's not uncommon for people to retire without having actually made a retirement plan and then find some financial surprises along the way. That can prompt some people to go back to work, and the faster pace of inflation we've been experiencing also is motivating some people to go back to work just to help cover their living expenses." So let me know what your thoughts are below. Are you considering going back to work either on a part-time or a full-time basis? Or are you already going back to work because you're seeing that the benefits that you're receiving are just not enough to go by? Either way, the government absolutely needs to come up with a long-term fix for this issue because, quite frankly, again, the cost of living adjustments that we're receiving each and every year are just not keeping up with inflation. As the years go by, this gap is going to be getting larger and larger. And again, something needs to be done to fix this issue. Perhaps we could even have a big increase right now in 2023 or perhaps in 2024 to sort of catch up with what we should actually be receiving. There are bills out there, perhaps one by Bernie Sanders, which would be a $200 increase across the board. Even though that wouldn't fix the issue over the past 20 years, where we're missing even more than $200, it would certainly help some people, I would definitely say. But that's all we have for today's video. I certainly hope that you enjoyed and found it helpful. If you did, again, I would greatly appreciate if you could give this video a like. Consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already, and I will see you in the next video.